Doreen Huffington's funeral was hard. It wasn't that I was particularly sad. She and I weren't really friends, more like buddies. But when you're 73, you have to keep track of your peers. Doreen was the third this year, and it was only June. I walked slowly toward my house, leaning on my cane, the result of a bad fall last winter. The doctors said it would take longer to recover as I got older, but I wasn't about to listen to their gloomy predictions. I still had a lot to do in this life, and I didn't think my age was a judgment at all. Maple Street, where I'd lived for the past 38 years, greeted me with its familiar quiet. Bowers had always been a quiet town, and this neighborhood was especially so. Victorian-style cottages, neat lawns, old trees. My favorite place on earth, though lately, Orrin had been more and more insistent that I move somewhere closer to it. Closer meant Sunny Hills, a nursing home with medical care and a beautiful view of the park. I used to go there when I visited my former high school coworkers. There was nothing sunny about the place, just the smell of medicine and fading lives. I walked up the porch steps, pulled my keys out of my purse, and tried to put them in the lock. It wouldn't turn. I tried again, taking a closer look. No, it was definitely my key. I hadn't mistaken it. But it wouldn't go into the keyhole. What the hell? I muttered, checking the other keys. None of them fit. The locks had been changed. I stood leaning on my cane and tried to make sense of the situation. This couldn't have been a mistake or an accident. Someone had deliberately locked me out of my own home. I pulled out my phone, one of the few modern things I was used to, though not without difficulty. Orrin had insisted I have a smartphone. "Mom, that way I can always reach you," he'd said. Now I called him. It rang, 123. I was about to leave a message when he answered. "Mom?" His voice sounded wary. "Are you home yet?" "I'd be home if I could get in," I answered dryly. "My keys don't fit." There was a pause. I could almost see him gathering his thoughts, formulating an answer. "Yes, we changed the locks," he finally said. "I was going to call you." Jiva and I discussed the situation and decided it was for the best. "You said yourself you had trouble getting up the stairs." "My house is one story, Orrin," I reminded him, feeling the anger building up inside me. "The only stairs are the 5 steps to the front porch." "You know what I mean, Mom. It's hard for you to take care of yourself. Yesterday you forgot to turn off the stove." "I didn't forget." "Jiva came by and found the pot on the stove." I sighed. Jiva, my sister-in-law, had a habit of dropping in unannounced and checking if everything was okay. It annoyed me, but I tolerated it for the sake of keeping the peace. Yesterday I did step away from the stove to answer the phone, but was going to return in a minute. Apparently that's when she showed up. "Orrin, I want to get into my house. Where are my new keys?" Again the pause, even more tense. "You don't need keys, Mom. Jiva and I have prepared a room for you at our place. And then we'll go to Sunny Hills together. I've already arranged it. They've just opened up a great place overlooking the garden." I felt my breath catching. They'd planned the whole thing. They'd waited until I'd gone to the funeral, changed the locks, probably packing my things at that very moment, deciding what Grandma would need at the nursing home. "So you're telling me I don't live here anymore?" I asked, surprised at how calm my voice sounded. "Mom, understand, it's for your own good. You fall, you forget to take your medicine, you leave the stove on." "That's very brave of you," I interrupted him. "What?" I said. "It's very brave, evicting your mother from her own home without warning. What's next? Declare me incompetent and take my savings?" "Mom!" He was outraged. "How can you say that? Jiva and I are only looking after you." "Of course, darling," I said in the tone I used to soothe cranky students at school. "I appreciate your concern. Where are Killian and Tagan now?" The question about his grandchildren confused him. "Killian's at work and Tagan's at college with classes until tonight." "What's that got to do with them?" "Just wondering." "So it's just Geneva at home?" "Yeah, she's packing up some of your stuff. Look, Mom, why don't I pick you up or send Giva? You don't want to be standing out there on the porch." "Don't worry, I'll find a place to spend the night," I replied. "And tomorrow we'll discuss the matter in a more legally sound." "Mom, you don't understand." I disconnected the call. I took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, calming down. I looked outside. None of the neighbors seemed to have noticed our little drama. Good thing. Less gossip. I wasn't really caught off guard. For months now, I'd been noticing signs of an impending coup. Oren started talking about Sunny Hills more often. Geneva started randomly dropping by to see if I'd remembered to take my meds or turn off the lights. The grandchildren became more and more insistent in wondering, "What's going to happen to the house when you're gone, Grandma?" I wasn't blind or deaf. I saw the greedy glances Geneva cast at my mother's china. I saw Oren's appraising glances at the furniture. I heard Killian talking to a friend on the phone about how, after Grandma, the house will be a bargain. The neighborhood will only get more expensive. I pulled out my phone again and dialed another number. "Hi, Beryl. It's Aldous Nairn. Remember me? Your math teacher in high school? Yeah, the one who made you do extra problems on the weekends." I smiled as I listened to my former student's enthusiastic voice. "Listen, sweetie, I need some help, and maybe your professional services." 20 minutes later, a cab pulled up. I looked back at my house one last time before getting into the car. The evening sun was gilding the windows, and the house seemed as cozy and secure as ever. But now it was off limits to me, at least for now. That's okay, I thought. We'll see about that. A plan was already forming in my head. I was not a helpless old woman to be pushed out of her own home for profit. I was Aldous Nairn, a 35-year math teacher, and if there was one subject I was good at, it was logic. I was also always able to calculate a few steps ahead. The cab pulled away, taking me away from the place I'd called home for nearly 4 decades. But I didn't feel like an exile, more like a warlord retreating to regroup before a decisive battle. I remembered the day Lawrence, my late husband, and I bought the house. I was 7 months pregnant with Oren, and we were desperate to move out of our cramped apartment to a place where the baby could grow up with a garden and a room of his own. Money was tight. The salary of a school teacher and assistant librarian was not generous. But my parents had recently died, leaving me a small inheritance, just enough for a down payment. I remember Lawrence worrying, "Aldous, are you sure it's all your money? Can't we find something cheaper?" But I insisted. It was the perfect house in the perfect location, near the school where I taught. Plus, my motherly instincts told me it would bring us happiness. And it did, for 8 years until cancer took Lawrence. And then I raised Oren in that house myself, working a part-time job to pay the mortgage, checking his homework every night, even though I was tired. I baked his favorite chocolate chip cookies every weekend. When he went to college, I took out a second home loan to pay for his tuition, and now he'd thrown me away like I was worthless. The cab pulled up in front of a modern glass and concrete building. The office of Quill and Associates was on the 8th floor. I paid the driver and, leaning on my cane, stepped into the cool lobby. "Well, Oren," I thought as I pressed the elevator button, "you've chosen to come this way. Don't take offense when I return the favor." In the elevator, I pulled a small notebook with a worn leather cover out of my purse. In neat teacher's handwriting, it contained dates, amounts, and brief notes, a history of my son's financial transactions with my accounts over the past 5 years. Oren didn't know I kept this notebook. He thought I was too old and absent-minded to notice small borrowings, as he called it, when I once asked him about a strange withdrawal from an account. Beryl Quill's office was in Bowers' most prestigious business center, a glass tower at the intersection of Central and Oak. I sat in a leather visitor's chair, holding a cup of tea that Beryl's assistant offered me. The office was tastefully decorated, austere but not impersonal. Diplomas and a few abstract paintings in calm colors hung on the walls. I remembered Beryl as a girl with 2 pigtails and a sharp mind. She was always the first to raise her hand in my math class, grasping the most difficult concepts on the fly. Now sitting in front of me was a confident woman of 42, with close-cropped hair and a penetrating gaze. But I still saw her as that bright little girl from the back of the class. "Mrs. Nairn, I can't believe your son did this." Beryl shook her head, closing the notebook she'd been jotting down the details of my situation. "What he's done is completely illegal. It's squatting, and we have every reason to sue him." "I don't want to sue my own son, Beryl," I sighed. "I want to teach him a lesson and go back to my house. On my terms." Beryl looked at me with respect. I see. Then we'll write a strong letter outlining the facts of the violation and the consequences. That should sober him up. But first, let's check to see who the house is officially registered to. I pulled a file out of my purse. It's all in here. I've been keeping copies of all the important paperwork with me for the last 6 months, ever since I noticed Orrin was taking too much interest in my finances. Prudent? Beryl nodded, accepting the folder. Where are you staying for the next few days? A hotel? I haven't decided yet. I could rent a room, of course. Don't even think about it, Beryl interrupted me. I have a guest room. You can stay with me as long as you need to. I don't want to embarrass you, sweetheart. Are you kidding? Beryl smiled. You have no idea how much your lessons have meant to me. If it weren't for you, I never would have gotten into law school. You were the only one who believed that a plumber's daughter could become a lawyer. It felt good to hear you say that. I had always tried to support my students, especially those who, like Beryl, came from families with disabilities. But now I felt uncomfortable finding myself in the role of needing help. I'm going through a bad time, Beryl continued, as if sensing my confusion. I'm recently divorced, so the house is a little empty and quiet. I'd love it if you'd keep me company. In that case, I gratefully accept your offer. I nodded. But only for a few days until the house is settled. Beryl looked at my papers again. Okay, the house is all yours. The mortgage is paid off. There are no leads for your son. He's acted completely illegally. Let's draft a letter to make him think about the consequences. In the evening, we arrived at Beryl's apartment, a spacious, high-ceilinged apartment with panoramic windows overlooking the city park. The guest room was cozy, with a comfortable bed and a desk by the window. Make yourself comfortable, Beryl said, setting my small bag on the poof by the bed. The bathroom is across the hall, the second door on the left. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. Thank you, sweetheart. You're very kind. When Beryl walked out, I slowly sank to the edge of the bed. It had been a long day, and the fatigue had finally taken its toll. I pulled a silver-framed photograph out of my bag, the only personal item I'd brought with me. It was of Lawrence and me standing outside our house the day we got the keys. So young, so happy. My thoughts went back to those distant days. Lawrence worked as an assistant librarian at the Bowers City Library, a quiet, thoughtful man with kind eyes and a soft smile. We met there in the library when I was looking for materials for my classes. He helped me find a rare book on the history of mathematics, and there was instant sympathy between us. Our marriage was happy, but short. When Orrin turned 8, Lawrence was diagnosed with an aggressive form of lung cancer. 6 months later, he was gone. I was left alone with a baby, a mortgage, and my husband's medical bills. Insurance covered some of the medical expenses, but not all. The most difficult period of my life began. I took extra hours at school, tutored in the evenings, and worked part-time at the bookstore on weekends. Sleep became a luxury, 4 or 5 hours a night, no more. Orrin was a withdrawn boy who was going through his father's death. I tried to give him as much attention as I could, but often felt I was failing. There were times when, after putting my son to bed, I locked myself in the bathroom and cried silently from helplessness and exhaustion. But we got through it. By the time Orrin graduated from high school, I had paid off my debts and even put some money aside for his college. It wasn't enough, though. I had to take out a second mortgage on the house. But I had no regrets. My son got a good education and became a financial advisor. At first, he was grateful for my sacrifices, but over time, something changed. Maybe it was his wife Geneva's fault, a beautiful but cold woman who always looked at me as an annoying nuisance. Or maybe it was Orrin himself, his growing ambition and greed. He started talking more and more about how irrational I was with my finances, hinting that he could help me with investments. I sighed and set the picture on my bedside table. This was no time to indulge in memories. I needed to focus on the present and the future. The next morning, Beryl drove me to the bank. I needed to check the status of the accounts and perhaps make some changes to the access rights. Good morning, Mrs. Nairn. The manager, Mr. Pratt, a thin man with a neatly trimmed beard, greeted me. What can I do for you? I'd like a statement of all my accounts for the last 5 years, I said. And I also need to remove my son Orrin Nairn from the list of trustees. Mr. Pratt raised his eyebrows in surprise, but said nothing. In half an hour, I had all the documents I needed to prove that Orrin had regularly withdrawn money from my account, small amounts. But the total amount of money I had withdrawn was considerable. "Now to the First National Bank," I said to Beryl as we left. "I have a safe there with some important documents in it." The safe contained the original deeds to the house, my will, and one other important thing: an audio recorder the size of a pack of cigarettes. For the past 3 years, I had recorded every conversation I had with my son and his family. Not out of paranoia, but out of caution. I could sense that attitudes were changing, and I wanted to have proof in case of a situation like this. There was something sad about recording my own son, catching him in lies and manipulations. But I consoled myself with the thought that I was doing it not out of revenge, but in self-defense. Back in Beryl's office, we laid all the papers on her desk. "This is impressive, Mrs. Nairn," she said, looking at the bank statements. "You've done a lot of preparation." "I taught math for 35 years, Beryl. I'm not easily confused by numbers. And these records?" Beryl picked up a recorder. "Are you sure you want to use them? It could ruin your relationship with your son," I wondered. Was I really prepared to go that far? "Let's keep them as a backup for now," I decided. Perhaps it would be enough to mention their existence. Beryl nodded and began drafting a formal letter while I went through the deeds to the house. The deed of sale, the mortgage agreement, the payment receipts. Everything was in perfect order. The house belonged to me and only me. "Here, look at this." Beryl handed me a draft of a letter. I stated the facts of the violation of the law on illegal eviction, mentioned the possible consequences, up to criminal prosecution, and demanded the immediate return of access to the house. I read the text carefully. The letter was impeccably written, professional, unemotional, but with a clear indication of the seriousness of the situation. "Add a clause stating that I could claim compensation for moral damages and for any missing or damaged items," I suggested. "And let's send it not only to Orrin, but also to his office. Let his coworkers know what a caring son he is, too." Beryl smiled. "You really want to teach him a lesson, don't you? I want him to realize that old age doesn't equal helplessness, and that you don't do that to a mother." That same day, the letter was sent, officially, with a courier requiring the recipient's signature. Now all that remained was to wait for Orrin's reaction. In the evening, Beryl offered me a glass of wine. "To justice," she said, raising her glass. "To life's lessons," I said, clinking my glass with hers. We sat by the window, looking out at the lights of the evening city. Beryl told me about her divorce, about her husband, who preferred a young secretary, about the struggle for the property they shared, about the feeling of betrayal and loneliness. "You know, Mrs. Nairn, your lessons have helped me in this situation," she said. "You always said that every problem has a solution. You just have to find the right approach." "I'm glad you remembered that lesson, Beryl," I smiled. "And please call me Aldous. We're not in class anymore." "Okay, Aldous," she stammered, unaccustomed to saying my name. "By the way, I did some research on Sunny Hills, that nursing home your son wanted to send you to. Do you know how much it costs to live there?" "I'm guessing not cheap. $3,000 a month for a basic package. And that's without medical care. With your injury, they'd offer an enhanced package, about $5,000. I whistled. Where was Orrin planning on getting that kind of money? My pension wouldn't be enough. From the sale of your house, I think. Beryl sipped her wine. I checked the market value of properties in your neighborhood. A house like yours is now worth about $450,000. I shook my head. The figure seemed unrealistic. When Lawrence and I bought the house, it was only worth $42,000. So my son expected to sell my house, put me in Sunny Hills, and take the rest of the money for himself. Very much so, Beryl nodded. And judging by his bank statements, he's in financial trouble. These borrowings from your accounts, they've been increasing in recent months, haven't they? I looked back at my records. Indeed, Orrin had withdrawn more from my accounts in the last 6 months than he had in the previous 2 years. Yeah, you're right. But why would he have a problem with that? He's a successful financial advisor. His wife works. Maybe they're living beyond their means, Beryl shrugged. Or he's made some bad investments. Either way, it would explain his sudden desire to put you in a nursing home. I wondered. Orrin had always liked to live large. The latest gadgets, expensive restaurants, vacations only in five-star hotels. Maybe his income couldn't keep up with his expenses. Well, now I'm even more curious to know what he's doing in my house, I said. Do you think he's gotten the letter yet? A courier was supposed to deliver it this afternoon. If not to Orrin personally, then to one of his colleagues. In any case, we'll soon know his reaction. I imagined Orrin reading the letter, written on law firm letterhead, and his face changing from surprise to anger and then to fear. I don't know why, but that image brought me satisfaction. That night I slept restlessly. I dreamed of the house empty, with the doors wide open as if screaming for help. I wandered through the rooms looking for something important, but I couldn't remember what it was. I woke up early with a sense of unease. At breakfast, Beryl told me that her assistant had found out something interesting. Orrin took time off work, said he had a family emergency. So he got the letter. I nodded. And now he's probably frantically looking for a way out. Or rummaging through your house for the documents you had thoughtfully taken with you, Beryl added. I imagined Orrin turning over drawers, looking under mattresses, tapping the walls for hiding places. It made me laugh and feel sad at the same time. Let him look, I said. Everything important is already here with me, and the rest of it, it's just stuff. I don't like the way he's running around, Beryl frowned. Maybe we should call the police. Technically, he was breaking into someone else's house. I shook my head. Let's not call the police just yet. He's my son, no matter what. Let's give him a chance to make things right. Beryl reluctantly agreed. After breakfast, she left for the office and I stayed in her apartment. I had to think about the next steps. I sat by the window looking at the city park below. Children played on the playground, young mothers chatted on the benches, elderly people strolled leisurely along the paths. Ordinary life running its course, and only my life suddenly went off the rails. But strangely enough, I didn't feel victimized. Rather, I felt a surge of energy that I hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if this situation had awakened something in me that had been dormant for a long time. Fighting spirit, determination, clarity of mind. Qualities that had always been with me but had dulled over the years under the weight of routine and loneliness. Orrin Nairn considered himself a successful man. At 48, he had everything a successful man should have. A prestigious job as a financial consultant, a beautiful wife, 2 children, a house in a good neighborhood, and a premium SUV. He was respected by his colleagues, bowed to by waiters in expensive restaurants, and hotel concierges smiled at his name. He was Orrin Nairn, a man who always knew exactly what he wanted and knew how to get it. But now, sitting behind the wheel of his car in the underground parking lot of an office building, he could feel that image crumbling before his eyes. In his hands, he was holding an envelope that had been delivered to him an hour ago by a courier right during a meeting with an important client. The envelope bore the logo of Quill and Associates, one of the most famous and expensive law firms in Bowers. Orrin didn't open the letter right away. Something told him he wouldn't like the contents. He put the envelope aside and tried to concentrate on the presentation for the client. But his thoughts kept returning to the letter, and finally he did something he'd never done before. He called off the meeting early, citing a family emergency. Now, sitting in the silence of his car, he finally opened the envelope. The letter had been written in dry legal language, but its meaning was clear. Orrin was accused of illegally evicting his mother, Oldest Nairn, from her own home at 15 Maple Street. He was accused of violating several articles of the Civil Code, as well as possible fraud in connection with unauthorized withdrawals from Oldest Nairn's accounts. The letter ended with a demand that he immediately return the house keys to the rightful owner, and a warning that if he refused, the matter would be referred to law enforcement for criminal charges. Orrin reread the letter twice, unable to believe his eyes. How did his mother, who could barely use a cell phone, know a lawyer of this caliber? And how did she know about the withdrawal? He had always been careful, taking small amounts that he thought his mother wouldn't notice. They were just borrowings. He was going to pay them back as soon as his investment started to show the promised returns. Shit, Orrin muttered, crumpling the letter. Shit, shit, shit. He started the car and drove out of the parking lot, breaking the speed limit. He needed to talk to Jiva right away. There was another surprise waiting for him at home. The exact same envelope was on the coffee table in the living room. A courier brought this about an hour ago, said Ginevra, watching her husband's reaction. I didn't open it. What's going on, Oren? He silently handed her his letter, which was already crumpled. Ginevra quickly ran her eyes over it, and her flawless face contorted with anger. This can't be true. She can barely remember what day it is, and suddenly she's hiring a lawyer? Someone is helping her. That's obvious. Oren collapsed into his chair, feeling panic rising inside. This was not at all what he had planned. Everything was supposed to go smoothly. His mother moving into a nursing home, the house being sold, the money going into an account controlled by him as trustee. Part of the money would actually go to support his mother, and the rest? The rest would help him out of the financial hole he'd put himself in with his failed investments. We have to do something. Geneva paced the room, tapping her heels nervously on the parquet floor. Have you called her? No, not yet. I wanted to talk to you first. Then call her. Find out what kind of game she's playing. Oren took out his cell phone and dialed his mother's number. Long beeps, no answer. He tried again, same result. She's not picking up, he said, tossing the phone back on the couch. I told you we should have done things differently. Geneva crossed her arms over her chest. I should have gradually convinced her that she couldn't do it on her own. Show her how good she'd be at Sunny Hills. And you decided to do it all in one fell swoop. Don't start, Oren snapped back. If we'd followed your plan, we'd be at it for another 6 months. I need the money now. You, always you, exclaimed Geneva. Have you thought about us? What will happen to our reputation if this goes to court? What will people say when they find out that Oren Nairn, a successful financial consultant, kicked his own mother out of her house? Oren turned pale. He hadn't really thought about that side of things. Reputation was an important part of his business. People trusted him with their money in part because they saw him as a responsible family man. If this story gets out, we need to call a family council right away, he decided. Call Killian and Tagan and have them come as soon as possible. 2 hours later, the family gathered in the living room. Killian, the oldest son, had rushed in from the office of the technology company where he worked as a junior manager. Tagan, the 19-year-old daughter, had come in from college, unhappy that she had to miss the party. So Grandma has hired a lawyer and is threatening to sue Dad, Tagan summarized after listening to her father's rambling story. Frankly, I'm not surprised. What do you mean? Oren frowned. Well, we practically kicked her out of her own house, Tagan shrugged. I'd be furious too. We didn't, Geneva said indignantly. We offered her more suitable accommodations for her age and health. Come on, Mom, Tagan rolled her eyes. We all know it wasn't an offer. Dad changed the locks while Grandma was at the funeral. That's pretty harsh. Oren looked at his daughter with wonder. When had she had time to become so straightforward? Not so long ago, Tagan had been completely on their side, nodding along when they discussed how Grandma was getting more and more distracted and dreaming of them selling the house and buying a yacht. The question is not whether we did the right thing or the wrong thing, Killian interjected. The question is what to do next. I suggest that we return the keys to Grandma and apologize. Let's pretend it was a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? Geneva was indignant. After a formal letter from a lawyer? It'll look like an admission of guilt. Aren't we guilty? Killian asked. Oren sighed. The family council was not going at all as he had expected. Instead of rallying together in the face of the threat, they started arguing amongst themselves. Okay, let's calm down, he said, raising his hands. We need to decide what to do about this letter. I'll try to contact my mom again and explain the situation to her. What situation? Tagan snorted. That we wanted to sell her house to pay off your debts? Oren stared at his daughter. What? How did you... I'm not blind, Dad. Tagan crossed her arms across her chest. I've seen the bills that come in your name. Collectors don't write greeting cards. There was a heavy silence in the room. Geneva looked at her husband as if she was seeing him for the first time. What collectors? She asked icily. You said we were just temporarily saving money because of the market volatility. Orrin felt a cold sweat run down his back. This was definitely not something he had planned to discuss today. It's a long story, he said. Let's deal with Mom's problem first. No, I want to know now, Geneva insisted. How bad is it? Orrin gave up. I owe about 200,000. The investments I made last year turned out to be not as secure as I thought. 200,000? Geneva jumped up from the couch. You invested $200,000 in some gamble and didn't tell me? It wasn't a gamble. It was a promising cryptocurrency that was going to grow at least 5 times. Oh my God! Geneva covered her face with her hands. You invested our savings in cryptocurrency? You, the financial advisor who was always telling clients to diversify and be careful. Technically, it wasn't just our savings, Killian interjected. Judging by the lawyer's letter, Grandma's money was there too. Orrin threw his son an annihilating glare. I was going to pay it all back, as soon as the house was sold. Which doesn't belong to you, Taggin finished for him. God, this is a nightmare, Geneva moaned. We could get sued. You could lose your license. Everyone will find out. Nobody's going to find out, Orrin shouted. We'll work it out. I'll talk to my mom, explain the situation to her. She'll understand. Do you really think Grandma would sell her house to cover your debts after you kicked her out? Killian asked incredulously. Orrin didn't answer. To be honest, he didn't believe it himself anymore, but it was beyond him to admit that he had trapped himself and his family. I need to go to her, he said at last. I need to talk to her in person. Do you know where she is? Geneva asked. No, but I'll find out. She can't have traveled far. Maybe she's at her friend Elizabeth's, suggested Taggin. They often go to those book clubs of theirs together. That's a good idea, Orrin nodded. I'll call Elizabeth. But Elizabeth knew nothing about Aldous' whereabouts. Neither did her other friends, whom Orrin called over the next hour. It seemed his mother had simply vanished. She can't just disappear, he said irritably, putting the phone away after another fruitless call. Someone must know where she is. What about that lawyer? Killian suggested. Quill, right? Maybe we should try to contact her? Her? Orrin interjected. Yes, Beryl Quill. She's pretty well known in town. Won some high-profile cases against corporations. I read about her in the Business Review. Orrin froze. Beryl Quill. The name seemed vaguely familiar. Wait, he said slowly. Beryl Quill. She went to Bowers High School? I have no idea, Killian shrugged. Why? If it's the same Beryl Quill, she was a student of Mom's. Orrin turned even paler. Mom was always proud of her. Said Beryl had a brilliant mind and would make a great lawyer. Wait a minute, Geneva intervened. Are you telling me that your mother is friends with one of the best lawyers in town? And you didn't think of that when you were planning your event? Orrin sank back into his chair, feeling his strength leaving him. No, he certainly hadn't considered that factor, as well as a lot of other things. Grandmother always kept in touch with her former students, Taggin said. Remember that NASA guy who visited her for Christmas 2 years ago? Or that female surgeon who counseled her after her fall? Grandma knows tons of successful people, Orrin remembered. His mother did have relationships with many of her former students, who seemed to have genuine affection and respect for her, not like her own son. I'll call Quill's office, he decided. I'll try to make an appointment. But that idea failed. The secretary politely informed him that Miss Quill did not accept calls from Mr. Nairn, and advised him to read the letter and comply with its requirements. What are we going to do? Geneva asked as Orrin threw the phone away in a rage. I don't know, he shouted. I just don't know. The situation seemed hopeless. His mother, whom he thought was a helpless old woman, was suddenly one step ahead of him. She had a powerful lawyer, evidence of his financial fraud, and apparently a determination to teach him a lesson. Maybe we should just, give up? Killian suggested. Give Grandma the keys back, apologize, and hope she doesn't sue us? Orrin wanted to object, to say that it wasn't that simple, that they needed to sell the house to pay off their debts. But he suddenly realized he was backed into a corner. Any action he took would only make things worse. Okay, he finally said. I'll get the keys back. And I'll try to talk to her. What about the debts? Geneva reminded him. I'll think of something, Orrin said uncertainly. Maybe I'll take out a loan against our house. Our house? Geneva jumped up. Don't even think about it. I won't let you risk the roof over our children's heads for your crazy investments. Then what are you proposing? Oren yelled. I don't have 200,000. I'm facing bankruptcy, maybe even jail if I'm found to have used client funds. There was dead silence in the room. Jinhua stared at her husband with wide-open eyes. Client funds, she whispered. You used client money for your investments? Oren realized he had said something unnecessary. He wasn't going to admit it even to his wife. They were temporary borrowings, he muttered. I plan to pay it all back before the annual audit, with interest. Oh my God! Geneva sank to the couch as if her legs had stopped holding her up. It's the end. We're broke. You're going to jail. What will I tell people? How will I look Cheryl and Martin in the eye? Or my parents? Oren didn't answer. He stared at one point, trying to realize the magnitude of the disaster his life had become. It had started so innocently, a small borrowing from a client's fund to make a profitable investment. He was confident that the cryptocurrency would take off and he would return the money at a profit. But it collapsed, so he borrowed some more money to break even on another investment, and another, until the debt hole got so deep that getting out of it seemed impossible. Selling his mother's house was his last hope. $450,000. That would have been enough to cover the debts, pay for his mother's first time in Sunny Hills, and maybe even leave a little left over for a fresh start. But now that hope had crumbled too. His mother had turned out to be not so helpless, and apparently she was well aware of his financial manipulations. I need to talk to her, Oren repeated. Explain the situation. Maybe she'll understand and help. After you kicked her out of the house? Tagan asked skeptically. I doubt it. I have no choice, Oren snapped at her. Either I convince her to help me or... He didn't finish his sentence, but everyone knew what he meant. I'm going back to college, Tagan said, getting up from the couch. I need to think about all this. Wait, honey, Jinhua tried to stop her daughter. We have to stick together as a family. Family? Tagan grinned bitterly. The same family that kicked her grandmother out of her house? No thanks, I'll pass. She left the room, slamming the door loudly. Killian got up too. I think I'll go too, he said. I have a big presentation tomorrow. I have to get ready. Killian, please, Oren pleaded. I need your support. I'm sorry, Dad. Killian shook his head. But I can't support what you did. Not with Grandma, not with the client's money. It's just wrong. He left too, leaving Oren and Jiva alone in the living room, which suddenly seemed too big and empty. What have we done? Geneva whispered, looking at her husband with a mixture of disgust and fear. What have you gotten us into? Oren didn't answer. He stared at the letter from the lawyer on the coffee table, trying to figure out the moment his life had gone downhill. When had he decided he could beat the market? When he first borrowed clients' money? Or when he began to see his mother not as someone to whom he owed everything, but as a burden and a source of potential money? He didn't know. But with every passing minute, he realized more and more clearly how serious a mistake he had made by underestimating his mother and overestimating his own cunning. The South Wind Cafe had always been my favorite place in Bowers. A small, cozy place with wooden tables, soft light, and the aroma of fresh baked goods. I used to come here on Saturdays to have a nice cup of tea, read a book, and take my mind off my everyday life for an hour or two. It was also where I celebrated the end of the school year with my colleagues, where I brought Oren as a child for special holidays, and where I celebrated his entrance to college. Today, I came back here in a completely different capacity, not as a regular visitor, but as a participant in a family conflict to be resolved. Beryl walked beside me, poised and confident in her perfectly tailored ivory suit. My former student and now my attorney. Are you sure you're ready for this conversation? She asked, holding the door for me. We can postpone the meeting if you need more time. The longer we put it off, the harder it will be, I replied as I entered the cafe. Besides, I've done enough preparation. Beryl nodded understandingly. During those days spent in her apartment, we had carefully strategized the upcoming meeting. Every word, every document, every audio recording. Everything was ready for battle. I noticed Oren right away. He was sitting at the far table, tapping his fingers nervously on his coffee cup. He didn't look good. A wrinkled suit, circles under his eyes, sparse stubble on his usually smooth-shaven face. It seemed the last few days had not been easy for him. Well, he'd chosen this path. "Good afternoon, Orrin," I said as I approached the table. "Do you mind if Miss Quill and I sit down?" My son flinched and looked up. He must have been so deep in thought that he hadn't noticed our approach. "Mom!" He stood up, knocking over the cup awkwardly. The coffee spilled all over the table. "Yeah, I'm glad you came." He reached out to hug me, but I took a step back. This wasn't the time for feigned affection. "Let's sit down," Beryl said, gesturing to the waitress. "And please bring us some napkins." We were seated at a table. I took a small box out of my purse and placed it on the table. "What's this?" Orrin asked, looking at the box suspiciously. "A tape recorder," I answered. "Do you mind if I record our conversation?" "Why?" He smiled nervously. "We're just talking as a family." "As a family," I repeated, turning on the tape. Interesting choice of words, considering the circumstances. The waitress brought napkins and wiped up the spilled coffee. We ordered tea for me, mineral water for Beryl, and another coffee for Orrin. "Mom, listen," Orrin began as the waitress stepped away. "I know what I did was reckless, but I acted in good faith. I was concerned for your safety, for your health." "Please." I raised my hand, stopping the flow of his words. "Let's just leave it at that. You weren't worried about my health when you changed the locks on my house while I was at a friend's funeral. You were worried about your financial problems." Orrin turned pale. "I don't know what you mean." 200,000 in debt, Orrin, I said calmly. "Failed cryptocurrency investments, use of client funds, possible legal problems. Isn't that right?" His eyes widened in surprise. "Where did you—" "It doesn't matter," I interrupted him. "What matters is that you've decided to solve your problems at my expense. Sell my house, put me in a nursing home, and use the rest of the money to cover your debts." He was silent, his eyes downcast. That was more eloquent than any confession. "Mom, I was going to pay you back," he finally said, "as soon as my business would get better." "How did you pay back the money you'd been taking out of my accounts for the last 5 years?" I asked, pulling bank statements out of my bag. "Here, for example, you withdrew $500 on March 23rd, and another $700 on April 10th, and another $1,200 on May 1st. Was that a temporary borrowing too?" Orrin looked at the statements with horror. "I don't understand how you—" "How did I know?" I smiled. "Orrin, I taught math for 35 years. You think I wouldn't notice money disappearing from my accounts on a regular basis? I've seen it all, every time. I was just waiting for you to come clean and explain why you needed the money. But you didn't say anything, and you kept taking it." "I was going to give it all back," he repeated like a broken record. "Of course you were," I nodded. "Just like the 80,000 you took supposedly to invest for me 3 years ago. Where is it, Orrin? Where is my 80,000? He remained silent, looking away. Beryl silently watched our conversation, occasionally making notes in her notebook. "You know what the saddest thing is?" I continued. "If you would just come to me and be honest about your problems, I would help you. You're my son. I've always supported you. But you chose to go behind my back, deceive me, and then throw me out of my own home." "I didn't throw you out." Orrin was outraged. "I offered you to live with us and then move to Sunny Hills. For $5,000 a month," I clarified. "And how long did you plan to pay for my stay there? A year, 2? And then what?" Orrin didn't answer. We both knew the answer. "Mr. Nairn," Beryl intervened, "we're not here to blame you. We want to find a solution that will satisfy everyone." "What solution?" He grinned bitterly. "I'm 200,000 in debt. I could go to jail if I'm found to have used client funds. I could lose my license. The only solution is to sell my mom's house and—" "No," I shook my head. "My house is not for sale. Not ever." "Then what do you suggest?" He was almost shouting, attracting the attention of the other visitors. "Let me go bankrupt? Go to jail? Is that what you want, Mom?" "No," I answered calmly. "I want you to realize what you did was wrong, and I want you to make up for your mistakes." "How?" He threw up his hands. "I can't just pull 200,000 out of thin air." "Mr. Nairn," Beryl intervened again, We have prepared a proposal that may help to solve your problem. But first, there are a few other things we'd like to clear up. She took a folder of documents out of her briefcase. Tell me, did you ever tell your family how your mother's house was purchased? Orrin frowned. What does that have to do with it? Just answer the question, Beryl insisted. Well, my parents bought it shortly after I was born. Orrin shrugged. My father worked at the library, my mother at the school. They'd been saving up for a down payment for a long time. That's not quite true, I said. The house was bought with the money from the sale of my parents' property. Your father did work at the library, and I worked at the school. But our salaries were just enough to pay the mortgage and basic expenses. The down payment, 40% of the house's value, was made entirely with my money. So? Orrin asked incomprehensively. So you've been telling your wife and children for years that the house was an inheritance from your father, I replied. That he was the one who provided the family with a place to live. That it was his credit. I never said that. Did you? I pulled a small recorder out of my bag. Let's hear it. I pressed the play button. Orrin's voice came out of the speaker. My father bought this house. He worked his ass off to get us a place to live. And now my mom is just sitting there alone, occupying 4 rooms that could bring good money when sold. I pressed pause. This was a conversation I had with Jiva 2 months ago, I explained. You were having dinner in the backyard and I was just coming in through the kitchen. You didn't notice me. Orrin stared at the recorder like it was a poisonous snake. Were you recording our conversations? He whispered. How long? 3 years, I answered. Ever since I noticed the money disappearing from my accounts. Ever since you started telling Jiva and the kids that I was getting increasingly distracted and needed supervision. Since you started discussing selling my house like I was already dead. I pressed another button on the recorder. Now Geneva spoke. She can't live alone, it's dangerous. If something happens to her, we will be blamed. It's better to put her in a nursing home where professionals will take care of her, and sell the house. It's too big for one person anyway. Orrin's voice again. I've already checked out the prices at Sunny Hills. The basic package is $3,000 a month. If you sell the house for $450,000, you can pay her living expenses for a few years in advance, and the rest of the money. I turned off the tape. I have dozens of these conversations, I said, where you discuss my old age, my dementia, my inability to live on my own, where you plan how to dispose of my assets, where you, Orrin, convince your children that I have become a burden. Orrin sat with his head down. His shoulders slumped as if all the air had been let out of him. Why are you doing this, Mother? He asked quietly. To humiliate me? To get back at me? No, I shook my head. To protect myself, and to make you realize that I'm not a helpless old woman to be tricked into throwing away. I'm still your mother, Orrin, and I deserve respect. There was silence in the cafe. Even the other patrons seemed to quiet down, sensing the tension at our table. What do you want from me? Orrin finally asked. For me to apologize? Okay, I apologize. What I did was wrong. I shouldn't have changed the locks. I shouldn't have taken your money. I admit it. What else? I want you to give me back the keys to my house, I said. And I want you to tell your family the truth. The whole truth. About the money, about the house, about your debts, and how you plan to solve your problems at my expense. And in return? He looked up. Would you help me with my debts? No. I shook my head. I won't pay for your mistakes, Orrin, but I have another offer. I nodded to Beryl and she pulled another folder out of her briefcase. We've looked into your financial situation, Mr. Nairn, she said, and we've worked out a plan to restructure your debt. You can sell your stake in the investment company, which will bring in about $120,000. The rest can be covered by selling your car and some other assets. Sell my stake in the company? Orrin looked at her with horror. This is my life's work. I've been building this company for 15 years. Do you have any other suggestions? Beryl asked. Considering that in case of disclosure of information about the misuse of client funds, you not only lose the company, but may also find yourself under investigation. Orrin was silent, contemplating the situation. I could see the emotions changing in his eyes. Anger, fear, despair, And finally, humility. I don't have a choice, do I? He grinned bitterly. There's always a choice, I replied. You can refuse our offer. You can keep looking for ways to take over my house. You can even try to have me declared incompetent, though. Given the evidence we have, that would be difficult. But you can also accept help and right your wrongs. Help? He snorted. You call that help? You're basically forcing me to sell my life's work. We're offering you a way out of a situation you created yourself, Beryl said calmly. The alternative is bankruptcy and potential criminal prosecution. Oren ran his hand over his face as if trying to wipe away his fatigue. I need to think, he said. And talk to Jiva. Sure, I nodded. But keep in mind that this offer is time limited. You have 3 days to think about it. And then what? He looked at me challengingly. Will you sue me? Will you send those tapes to the police? To the SEC? I hope it doesn't come to that, I said softly. You're my son, Oren. No matter what, I love you, and I want the best for you. But I also want you to understand that your actions have consequences, and sometimes you have to pay for your mistakes. He nodded without looking at me. I understood. 3 days. And one more thing, I added. I want you to return the keys to my house. Today. Oren took a bunch of keys out of his pocket and put them on the table. Here. Is that all of them? No. I shook my head. There's something else I want you to understand. I leaned toward him and lowered my voice so we couldn't be heard at the neighboring tables. The house was never your father's legacy, Oren. It was my house from the beginning. I bought it with the money my parents left me. I paid off the mortgage while working a part-time job after your father died. I took out a second mortgage to pay for your college tuition. I put not only money into this house, but a piece of my soul. And I won't let you or anyone else take it away from me. Oren looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. There was surprise in his eyes, and something else, maybe a delayed realization. I didn't know, he mumbled. About your parents' money, about the second loan. Dad never said. Your father died when you were 8, I reminded him. He didn't get to tell you a lot of things, but I was there for you all those years. You could have just asked me. He nodded, lowering his eyes. I'm sorry, Mom, I really am. I know. I put my hand on his palm. And I believe you can fix your mistakes. Not for me, but for yourself and your family. That was the end of our meeting. Oren left first, leaving the coffee money and my house key untouched on the table. Beryl and I sat for a while, finishing our tea. You were great, she said respectfully. Firm, but fair. I just want him to understand, I sighed. Oren had always been an ambitious boy, always wanted more than he had. That's not a bad thing in and of itself. But somewhere along the way, he forgot the important things: honesty, respect, family. Do you think he'll take you up on your offer? He doesn't have a choice, I shrugged. The alternative is too scary to consider, but that's not the point. It's important that he realizes his mistakes and learns a lesson. Otherwise, this whole story will teach him nothing. Beryl nodded, gathering her papers. What will you do next? Will you go back to your house? Yes, I smiled. But first, I'll have the locks changed, just in case. We paid and left the cafe. The day was clear and warm, with a light breeze bringing the scent of linden trees in bloom. I inhaled the scent deeply, feeling the tension of the last few days gradually let go of me. There was still a lot of work ahead of me. Getting home, getting things in order, maybe even making peace with my son's family. But the hardest part seemed to be over. You know, Beryl, I said as we walked to her car, at my age you begin to appreciate the simple things. A roof over your head, a good cup of tea, a chance to read a book in peace in your favorite chair. I didn't want a war with my own son. I just wanted to keep what was dear to me. And you did that, Beryl smiled. What's more, you taught him a lesson he won't soon forget. I hope so, I nodded. After all, I've been a teacher all my life. Teaching is what I do best. Returning to my own home turned out to be a strange experience. I stood on the doorstep holding the new keys. Beryl and I had decided to change the old locks the same day Oren had given me the keys back. It wasn't that I didn't trust my son, but caution was never a bad thing. The house looked almost exactly as I'd left it when I'd gone to Doreen Huffington's funeral. Almost, but not quite. There were signs of a hasty search. The drawers of the dresser pulled out and not fully closed, the books on the shelves shifted, the carpet in the living room wrinkled. Orrin was looking for something. Documents, money, valuables. He might even have found some of the little things I hadn't had time to take with me. But the important things stayed with me. The deeds to the house, the bank statements, the audio recordings of our conversations. I walked slowly through the rooms, putting things back where they belonged, restoring order. It was a ritual of sorts. I was making this house my own again, erasing the traces of the intrusion. In the bedroom, I pulled my wedding ring out of the jewelry box, the only thing of value I hadn't taken with me when I left. Not out of forgetfulness, but because I was sure Orrin wouldn't touch the heirloom. And indeed, the ring was still there. Maybe deep down, my son still had some moral principles. I spent the first week after my return putting the house in order and thinking about what had happened. Beryl called regularly to make sure I was all right. I never heard from Orrin. Then, on the 8th day, the doorbell rang. On the doorstep stood Killian, my eldest grandson. He looked uncertain, shifting from foot to foot and holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. "Hi, Grandma," he said, holding out the bouquet to me. "May I come in?" I stepped back silently, letting him into the house. We went into the kitchen where I put the flowers in a vase and made tea. "How are you?" Killian asked when we sat down at the table. "Fine," I replied. "And you?" "Not so good, to be honest." He shook his head. "After everything that's happened, it's not the best of times for the family." I waited silently for him to continue. Killian had always been the most thoughtful of my grandchildren, the most reflective and introspective. I knew he needed time to formulate his thoughts. "Mom and Dad are on the verge of divorce," he finally said. "After Daddy told me about his debts and what he planned to do with your house, Mom was furious. They fight all the time. Tagan's hardly ever home, always at college or at his girlfriend's. And I just don't know what to do." "What do you want to do?" I asked. Killian shrugged. "Honestly, I want things to go back to the way they used to be. When we were a normal family. When we'd come over for Sunday lunches and you'd tell stories about your students and Dad would make jokes and Mom would laugh at his jokes." I sighed. Those were good times indeed. But they had passed long before the story of the locks. Gradually, year by year, our relationship changed. Orrin became more and more aloof, Geneva more and more cold. The grandchildren grew up and went about their business. Sunday lunches became a formality and then stopped. I was visited only on holidays and not always. "You know, Killian," I said, "sometimes you can't go back. But you can build something new. Something maybe even better than the old one." He looked at me hopefully. "Do you think it's possible? After everything that's happened?" "I think it's worth a try," I smiled. "How about we revive the tradition of Sunday lunches? This Sunday at my house. Will you come?" "Sure," he nodded. The others?" "I'll invite everyone," I said. "Let them decide." On Sunday, I got up early and made my special apple pie, the apple pie Orrin had loved as a child. Then I roasted chicken and herbs, made mashed potatoes and salad. By 2 o'clock, the table was set, the house cleaned, and I, in my best dress, waited for my guests. Killian came first, helped set up the chairs, and brought a bottle of good wine. Tagan came next, unexpectedly neat and serious, with a box of cakes from a fancy pastry shop. Orrin and Geneva were the last to arrive, when I had almost given up hope. They kept their distance from each other, didn't speak, but the fact that they had come together was a good sign. Lunch began stiltedly. We exchanged formal phrases, avoiding talking about what had happened. But gradually, with each passing minute, the atmosphere grew warmer. Killian talked about his new project at work. Tagan shared her plans for a summer internship. Even Geneva thawed a bit when I praised her new hairstyle sincerely. Only Orrin remained silent, staring down at his plate. I could see how hard it was for him to be here, in the house he'd tried to take from me. Among the family he had to admit his mistakes to. After dessert, When the grandchildren went into the living room to pick out a movie to watch and Geneva helped me with the dishes, I took Oren aside. "How are you doing?" I asked. "Fine," he shrugged, not looking me in the eye. "Sold my stake in the company, like you and Beryl suggested. Paid off most of my debts. Looking for a new job. How's that going?" "Not so good." He grinned bitterly. "Who needs a financial advisor with a tarnished reputation? The SEC has launched an investigation. If they find evidence of misuse of client funds, I could lose my license." "I'm sorry, Oren," I said sincerely. "I didn't mean for things to go this far." "I know, Mom." He finally looked at me. "It's my fault. It's all mine. I drove myself into that trap and then I tried to get out at your expense. It was undignified." For the first time in a long time, I heard genuine remorse in his voice. Not ostentatious regret, not a formal apology, but a real realization of his mistake. "I have a proposition for you," I said. "Do you remember Mr. Phelps? Your former colleague from high school? The one who taught economics?" "Yes," I nodded. "He now runs an adult education center. They're looking for a financial literacy teacher. I talked to him about you." Oren looked at me incredulously. "You recommended me? After everything I've done?" "You're my son, Oren." I put my hand on his shoulder. "No matter what. And you've always been good with finances. Yes, you made a mistake. A serious mistake. But that doesn't mean you don't deserve a second chance." "I don't know what to say." He looked confused. "Thank you, Mom." "Don't thank me ahead of time," I smiled. "The pay there is a lot less than you're used to, and you'll have to work hard. But it's honest work that can help people avoid the same mistakes you made." He nodded, considering my words. "I'll call Mr. Phelps tomorrow." This conversation was a turning point. Not right away, of course. It took months to rebuild trust. But gradually, our family began to rebuild our relationship. Oren did get a job at the education center. It was hard at first. He had to not only get used to his new job and much more modest salary, but also struggle with feelings of humiliation. A former successful financial consultant, he now taught the basics of saving money to housewives and pensioners. But over time, he found fulfillment in the work. His practical experience, including mistakes, proved valuable to his students. He could use real-life examples to show what financial illiteracy and uncontrolled risk-taking could lead to. He and Giva divorced after all. Too much distrust and resentment had accumulated between them. But the divorce was civilized, without scandals and public clarification of relations. Geneva moved to another city closer to her parents, and Oren stayed in Bowers, renting a small apartment near the center. The grandchildren had changed the most, especially Tagan. From a frivolous girl, interested only in parties and fashion, she turned into a serious law student. Perhaps she was influenced by the example of Beryl Quill, whom she met at one of our Sunday lunches. Killian, too, had matured. He became more interested in family history, asking me about my parents, about my youth, about how Lawrence and I met and built our lives. One day he confessed that he had never before considered how much work and sacrifice was behind what he had always taken for granted. Sunday lunches became a tradition. Each week my home was filled with voices, laughter, sometimes arguments, but always genuine emotion. We became a family again, not perfect with our own problems and disagreements, but real. 6 months after our first Sunday dinner, I decided it was time for a long-planned move. For another family dinner, I invited not only Oren and the grandchildren, but also Beryl and her new husband, and a few old friends. When everyone was at the table, I stood up and tapped my fork lightly on my glass to attract attention. "I have an announcement to make," I said when everyone was quiet. "I'm going on a trip in a month." "Traveling?" Oren asked in surprise. "Where to?" "To Europe," I smiled. "First to England. I've always wanted to see the British Museum and Stonehenge. Then France, Italy, and Greece. For 3 months." "3 months?" Killian looked shocked. "But Grandma, you've never traveled farther than the next state before." "That's exactly why now is the time," I nodded. "I'm 73 years old. If not now, when?" "But what about home?" Oren asked. "Who will look after it?" "I asked Killian to stay here while I was away," I said. He agreed. Right, Killian? My grandson nodded, still looking surprised. Yes, but I didn't know you were going away for 3 months. Where did you get the money for such a trip? Oren asked. It must cost a fortune. I've been saving little by little for the last 15 years, I said, into a special account that no one knew about. Even you, Oren, with all your borrowing, hadn't gotten to it. A chuckle ran through the room. My son blushed, but smiled too. He had learned to treat his past mistakes with a dose of self-irony. And when did you have time to plan all this? Tagan asked. Oh, it was a long time ago, I winked at her. But I'd only finalized the details recently with Beryl's help. She helped me book hotels and excursions. All eyes turned to Beryl, who smiled modestly. Your grandmother is a very determined person, she said. When she makes up her mind about something, there's no stopping her. That's right, Oren muttered, and everyone laughed again. The rest of the evening was spent discussing my upcoming trip. Tagan advised on what clothes to take, Killian worried about safety, and Oren suggested installing an emergency app on my phone. I listened to them with a smile, feeling my heart fill with warmth. They were taking care of me, not as a helpless old lady, but as a loved one embarking on a great adventure. When the guests had gone and Beryl and I were alone putting away the dishes, she said thoughtfully, You know, Aldous, you've changed your family. The way they look at you now, with respect, with admiration, it's not what it used to be. They're the ones who have changed. I shook my head. I was just being me. Maybe, Beryl smiled. But you showed them who you really are. And that changed a lot of things. I thought about what she'd said. Maybe she was right. All my life I had tried to be a good mother, grandmother, teacher, to care for others, to support, to help. But somewhere along the way, I let my family forget that I am more than just those roles. That I am an individual with my own dreams, plans, strength of character. It wasn't until they tried to take away my autonomy that I finally showed them that side of me. You know what my biggest regret is? I told Beryl. That I didn't do it sooner. I didn't set boundaries. I didn't remind them that I deserve respect. Maybe then we could have avoided the whole thing with the locks and the legal threats. Maybe, she nodded. But sometimes we need a crisis to realize what's really important and to find the strength to change things. I nodded in agreement. The crisis did change things, both in my family and in myself. I became more confident, more determined. I stopped being afraid of conflict and disapproval. I learned to assert my boundaries and say no when necessary. And a month later, I actually flew to London. I stood in the drizzling English rain looking at Big Ben, wandered the halls of the British Museum looking at ancient artifacts. I drank real French coffee in a small cafe in Montmartre, sunbathing on a Greek beach, looking out at the azure sea. And every week she called home, telling about her adventures. They listened with interest, asked questions, asked for pictures. And I felt that I was finally living the life I had always dreamed of, but put off for later. When I returned, tanned and full of impressions, they met me at the airport with flowers and posters. Even Jiniwa came from her new city. And at home, I was surprised to find a renovated bathroom, which I had dreamed of for years, but could not get the money and energy to do. It's from all of us, Oren said as I stared in amazement at the new shower and the beautiful tiles. We thought you deserved a little updating around the house. Thank you. I hugged him, tears welling up in my eyes. It's a beautiful gift. That night, lying in my bed, I thought about how strange things had turned out. The attempt to deprive me of my home had resulted in that home becoming even more mine. The attempt to remove me from family decisions made my voice more powerful. Trying to write me off because of my age has made everyone see that I am still full of life and plans. On the bedside table was a guidebook to Japan, my next dream. Next to it was a notebook with notes on places I wanted to visit. Age was no obstacle to dreaming. I proved that to myself and my family. I fell asleep with a smile, thinking that sometimes the end of one story becomes the beginning of another, much more interesting one, and that at 73, life can be no less colorful and intense than at 30 or 40. You just have to have the